rock doesn't fall upward. Sergeant Nate Ortega knows that the way he knows his own name, and he is watching it happen anyway. A curtain of loose shale on the mountainside above the pass, hanging in the air for a full 2 seconds before the ground beneath his boots stops shaking and gravity remembers how to do its job again. By the time the dust settles, there's a fortified gate in front of him that wasn't there 90 seconds ago, and men on top of it screaming in a language his earpiece has no translation database for. 15 hours from this exact spot, most of what Ortega is looking at right now will be rubble, corpses, or both. Nobody standing in this pass yet knows that. History already does. The mountain corridor is called Zhuyongguan, a narrow defile cut through jagged peaks roughly 30 miles from the walls of the Jin Dynasty capital. And in the year 1181, on a calendar nobody in this platoon is using yet, it is considered the single most important choke point standing between northern China and total catastrophe. The fortification here isn't the postcard version of the Great Wall that shows up on calendars centuries later. No soaring, crenellated stone battlements, no gift shops. This is packed, rammed earth, reinforced with timber and quarried rock, watchtowers of mud, brick, and wood, a gate wide enough for a loaded caravan and no wider, guarded by a garrison of Jin Dynasty soldiers in lamellar iron scale armor who have spent their entire careers believing this pass simply cannot be taken by force. They are about to learn that cannot be taken by force and cannot be taken are two very different sentences. Beyond the pass, spread across the valley floor like a slow-moving flood, are roughly 200,000 men under the personal command of a warlord whose name will eventually be feared from the Pacific coast to the gates of Vienna. Temujin, better known to history as Genghis Khan. His army has already broken 3 Jin field forces this campaign season alone. Every soldier riding with him has watched fortified cities fall to tactics history hasn't invented a word for yet, because the man giving the orders is still in the process of inventing them. The Jin garrison commander at Zhuyongguan, a nobleman named Wanyan Qingyu, whose military experience mostly consists of court politics and a title inherited rather than earned, is currently convinced that the pass will hold because it always has. He is, in the very specific and very final sense that matters here, wrong. None of that history has actually happened yet in the 15 hours before it does. What has just happened in the space of about 4 seconds is that a routine joint mountain warfare exercise in a nameless modern range somewhere half a world away has been swallowed by a landslide that shouldn't have started, tossed through something that isn't quite an earthquake and isn't quite anything else, and deposited 100 United States Marines directly inside the courtyard of a fortress gate that hasn't existed in this exact configuration for roughly 800 years. Ortega counts heads on instinct before his brain catches up to what his eyes are telling him. 100 men in modern combat gear, standing in a cloud of settling dust inside walls of packed earth instead of the granite cliff face they were climbing an hour ago. Above them, Jin soldiers in scaled iron armor stare down from a wooden watchtower with an expression that has nothing to do with military discipline and everything to do with raw animal disbelief. Command, this is Ortega. Comms are dead. GPS won't lock onto anything. I need eyes on our position because what I'm looking at doesn't match any map I've ever trained on. Nobody answers, because there is nobody left on the other end of that channel to answer. Captain Elise Marlowe is already moving before the dust fully clears, rifle up but low, scanning the fortress walls with the fast, disciplined sweep of someone who has spent a career reading unfamiliar terrain in seconds rather than minutes. What she reads here doesn't compute cleanly. Earthen ramparts, wooden gate towers, soldiers in scale armor she half recognizes from a museum exhibit she toured once, years ago, without ever expecting to need the memory for anything practical.
A Jin officer descends from the tower with a curved saber half drawn, flanked by two spearmen whose hands are shaking too hard to hold their weapons level.
He shouts something sharp and furious in a dialect none of Marlowe's platoon speaks, and for 3 full seconds the entire courtyard holds its breath on the edge of a fight nobody actually wants. Marlowe lowers her rifle first, slow and deliberate, palm raised open. It's the oldest gesture in the history of two strangers trying not to die over a misunderstanding, and it buys her exactly enough time for the officer's fury to curdle into something closer to confused, wary curiosity. "We're not your enemy," she says, knowing full well the words mean nothing to him, trusting the tone to carry more than the vocabulary. "Whatever's coming through that valley, that's the only thing that matters right now." The officer's eyes flick past her shoulder toward the mountain pass beyond the gate, toward a horizon that both armies, the one that's been here for years and the one that just fell out of the sky, already understand is about to fill with riders. He sheathes his saber. It isn't trust. It's arithmetic. Whatever these strangers are, they clearly aren't Mongols, and right now that's the only qualification that matters. Marlowe has less than an hour to turn 100 exhausted, disoriented Marines into a functioning defense of a gate built for a very different kind of war. And the numbers she's working with are not the numbers anyone would choose if choosing were an option. 100 Marines. Each carries a combat load of 210 rounds for a standard issue rifle, 10,500 rounds total across the entire platoon, and every single one of them is already all the ammunition that will ever exist for this fight, because there is no supply chain reaching back through whatever tore this hole in the mountainside. 4 medium machine guns round out the heavy weapons, 2,000 rounds of belted ammunition apiece to start. 6 shoulder-fired rockets built to punch through modern armor plating came through the landslide strapped to 2 Marines' packs. 6 shots, mostly useless against a mountain pass full of horsemen, but potentially decisive if the enemy ever bunches tight enough in the gate's narrow throat to turn one of those rockets into something closer to a hammer blow against a packed formation. Night vision battery packs are rated for roughly 6 hours before they die completely, and water is a 2-day supply at most, calculated for men fighting in daylight heat that this mountain valley, even in early spring, does not intend to make gentle. 10,500 rifle rounds, 6 rockets nobody built for infantry, 200,000 riders somewhere past that valley floor, Marlowe says over the platoon net, flat, almost bored, the particular calm of an officer who has already done this math twice in her head and doesn't love either answer. Run it yourselves and tell me in the comments whether 100 of us was ever supposed to be enough for a number that size. She makes the first real tactical decision within the hour, and it's not the one the Jin officer, whose name, translated roughly through gestures and a handful of shared words, comes across as something like Wanyan, initially wants to hear. Rather than spreading the platoon's firepower along the entire fortress wall the way the existing garrison has always done, Marlowe concentrates nearly all of it directly above and beside the gate itself, betting everything on the idea that an army this size will always try to force the single choke point rather than waste time scaling earthen ramparts under fire, and that killing momentum at the one door matters infinitely more than thin coverage everywhere else. Would you have massed every gun at the single gate and gambled the walls hold themselves? Or spread the defense evenly and risked the gate falling faster without enough weight behind it? The first riders appear on the valley floor before the sun reaches its peak, and what comes next isn't the full weight of Genghis Khan's army. It's a probing force, roughly 1,000 light cavalry sent forward to test whatever the garrison's scouts reported seeing at the gate overnight. Among them rides a young archer named Batu, barely into his 20s, carrying a composite bow built from horn, sinew, and wood, layered together with a craftsmanship his grandfather taught him, capable of driving an arrow through boiled leather armor at 200 paces. A weapon good enough, he believes, to have already helped conquer half of northern China this campaign season alone. He has heard rumors overnight of strange defenders glimpsed atop the gate tower, dismissed by his squad leader as nothing more than exhausted Jin reinforcements pulled in from some smaller garrison further down the pass. He believes it, right up until the gate tower erupts with a sound that makes his warhorse rear in pure animal panic beneath him. Imagine, for one impossible second, every signal drum in the entire Mongol army struck at once, over and over, without a single pause between strikes. Batu watches the veteran riding directly beside him, a man who fought at the fall of 3 separate Jin cities and believed nothing left in this campaign could still frighten him. Simply drop from his saddle. No arrow he can see, no warning cry. Gone between one heartbeat and the next. There is no cloud of dust marking where the death came from. There is no pause in the killing that any rider could time a charge around. He wheels his horse hard and retreats without waiting for an order. And he is not alone. The entire probing force breaks and scatters back down the valley within less than a minute, leaving perhaps 120 men and horses down on the open ground below the gate. 100 Marines standing, 0 casualties. Ammunition expended, just under 600 rounds. Somewhere back across that valley, word is already reaching a command tent that has broken every fortified position it has faced this entire campaign, and the man inside that tent does not stay confused about a setback for very long. Sitrep, 100 Marines in the line, ammunition at 94%, 6 rockets untouched in reserve. The probe has failed completely, and an army that has never once lost a siege it fully committed to is not going to treat one bad morning as a reason to walk away. Genghis Khan's response arrives within a day, and it isn't another cavalry charge into the gate's teeth. It's something far more dangerous because it doesn't rely on brute force at all. It relies on knowing exactly how a frightened, inexperienced commander thinks. Mongol riders stage a deliberate, theatrical retreat along the valley floor throughout the following morning, abandoning supply carts, scattering equipment, riding in a pattern of visible disorder that any veteran officer would immediately recognize as bait. Wanyan, however, is not a veteran officer. He is a nobleman desperate to prove his worth to a court that gave him this command out of favoritism rather than merit. And the sight of a fleeing Mongol vanguard is to him an opportunity too glorious to leave unclaimed. He orders half his own garrison to sally out from the gate in pursuit, convinced the stranger's weapons have already broken the enemy's nerve completely, and no amount of Marlowe's furious translated objections is enough to stop him. This is his fortress, his command, and centuries of Jin dynasty military tradition don't bend easily to a foreign officer's warning, however uncanny her weapons might be. The Jin sortie rides directly into a trap that has broken far stronger armies than this one, encircled and annihilated on open ground less than 2 miles from the gate they just abandoned. And Marlowe watches through her rifle's optic as half her fortress's original garrison, men she had no authority to stop, dies in the open in less than 20 minutes, their own commander among them, screaming for a rescue that 100 Marines cannot possibly reach in time without abandoning the gate itself. Sitrep, 100 Marines still standing at the gate, 0 direct casualties, ammunition at 89%. The Jin garrison's strength has been cut roughly in half by a trap the Marines couldn't stop. The gate now holds fewer defenders than it did at dawn, and the main body of the Mongol army, the real one, not the bait, is finally visible on the horizon, moving toward the undefended flank that sortie just tore open. By early evening, the situation has stopped being a defense and started being a race against physics. With the surviving Jin soldiers shaken, leaderless, and barely holding a portion of the wall the sortie left thin, Marlowe redistributes her 100 Marines to cover gaps that a full garrison should have been filling, stretching an already tight defense across more frontage than it was ever built to hold alone. Machine guns run hot faster than doctrine allows for. One gun's barrel warping badly enough after a sustained burst that the gunner has to swap it with hands wrapped in a spare glove, because the metal has gone past the point where skin can survive contact with it. Night vision battery packs, drawn down hard by a full day of continuous use with no opportunity to conserve power, are already reading under 50%, with the sun barely below the horizon. An empire that's conquered half of northern China in a single campaign season just got outmaneuvered by its own reputation, Marlowe notes flatly to her platoon sergeant, watching the last of the Jin sortie's survivors stumble back through the gate in shattered 2s and 3s. Genghis Khan didn't need to break this wall today. He just needed one nobleman who wanted a parade. Nobody laughs. It needed saying anyway, because pretending the enemy's cleverness isn't the real threat here would be its own kind of dangerous lie. Sit rep. 98 Marines fully combat effective. 2 treated for minor injuries sustained repositioning under fire. Ammunition at 74%. 1 machine gun down to a spare barrel. Night vision capability under 50%, with full dark still hours away. The main Mongol army has begun forming for what will clearly be the real assault. No longer a probe, no longer a trick. The full weight of 200,000 men finally turning toward a gate that has just lost half its original defenders to its own commander's pride. The assault that follows after nightfall comes exactly the way the mountainside's tremor promised it would 15 hours earlier. Waves of dismounted heavy infantry backed by siege ladders and covering volleys of arrows arcing over the wall in the dark, while somewhere behind them drums beat a rhythm meant to break nerve rather than announce tactics, and torches turned the valley floor into a shifting, hellish orange glow. Machine guns burning through their last full belts cut down the first 2 waves before ladders ever touched the earthen ramparts. But the sheer weight of the third wave finally gets men over the wall itself, close enough that the fight collapses into exactly what Ortega feared standing in that dust cloud 15 hours earlier. Steel against steel, rifle butts and boot knives against curved sabers. No room left to aim, no time left to reload. Just the raw, ugly math of who is still breathing when the torches finally start to gutter out. This is the moment the rock slide's opening promise finally arrives in full. This is the courtyard, the screaming in a language his earpiece never learned. Rubble and corpses exactly where history always said they'd be. Marlowe commits the last of her 6 rockets into the compressed mass of Mongol infantry, finally breaking through the gate's own timbered doors. The detonation tearing a gap in the assault wide enough that her remaining Marines, backs against the inner wall, finally have room to reload, rather than simply hold the line with bayonets and desperation. It very nearly isn't enough. A knot of perhaps 30 Mongol soldiers, driven past caution by the fury of a commander who has never once failed to break a fortified position in this entire campaign, actually reaches the inner courtyard in the chaos, and for 90 brutal seconds the fight becomes hand-to-hand in the dark, lit only by burning debris and the muzzle flash of rifles fired close enough to scorch fabric. It is Batu, the young archer from the morning's failed probe, who somehow survived that retreat and volunteered for the night assault out of shame rather than confidence, who reaches the inner courtyard first, bow long since discarded for a saber he barely knows how to use.
He has spent this entire day watching an enemy he cannot understand kill his countrymen from a distance he could never close. Now, finally within reach of the strangers who terrified him at dawn, he does not hesitate, driven by something closer to desperation than courage. He does not survive the encounter. But for 4 or 5 seconds in the smoke and the screaming, 2 worlds separated by 8 centuries meet at the edge of a blade, and it is, for just that long, an even fight. Sitrep, 79 Marines still able to fight, 14 wounded, 7 dead, the platoon's heaviest single loss of the entire engagement. Ammunition remaining, 16%, 0 rockets left. The gate is held, barely, and as the last of the night assault breaks and withdraws down the valley, the drums finally fall silent for the first time since dusk. Dawn over Juyongguan arrives on a fortress that, by every reasonable measure available to either army, should already belong to Genghis Khan. It doesn't. Scouts report the main Mongol force withdrawing east rather than pressing a costly second assault, not because the army has been broken, but because a commander who built an empire on never wasting men against a position that refuses to fall efficiently has clearly decided this particular gate, on this particular night, has cost more than it's currently worth compared to easier targets elsewhere along the frontier. The cost sitting on the survivors is real and impossible to soften. 7 Marines did not live to see this dawn. 14 more carry wounds serious enough that this gate, whatever comes of it, will be remembered by names most of the people who eventually study this campaign will never learn to pronounce correctly. The surviving Jin soldiers, barely 30 of the original garrison, plus whatever stragglers crawled back from Wanyan's disastrous sortie, stand in stunned, hollow silence, staring at defenders who came from nowhere and held a gate their own commander nearly lost through his own vanity. A surviving Jin lieutenant, older and clearly more experienced than the noble who got half the garrison killed chasing false glory, finds Marlowe near the shattered gate timbers in the pale morning light. He wanted a victory he did not earn, the lieutenant says slowly, through gestures and the handful of words both sides have cobbled together over one impossibly long night. You gave us one we did not deserve either. I do not know which failure to mourn first. Mourn the men, Marlowe answers. The rest is just command decisions. Some of them get people killed. Yours did. Mine mostly didn't. That's the whole difference today. There's no triumph in the courtyard. There's only the flat, bone-deep exhaustion of survivors standing among rubble, corpses, and spent brass, doing the quiet, terrible arithmetic of exactly what one gate costs to keep out of Mongol hands for one more day. The mountainside tremors again just past midday, the same violent, wrong shudder that brought them here. Loose shale rising instead of falling for one impossible heartbeat before gravity remembers its job. The Jin lieutenant offers a formal bow, hands pressed together, the closest gesture of respect his own tradition has for men who arrived from nowhere and asked for nothing in return. Marlowe returns a crisp, modern salute, and 93 exhausted Marines, 7 fewer than fell out of the sky 15 hours earlier, 14 carried on improvised litters, step back into a landslide that swallows them whole and leaves behind nothing but rubble, brass, and a gate still technically standing. Because Juyongguan does not fall in 1181 the way history recorded, the entire trajectory of the Mongol campaign against the Jin dynasty stretches years longer than it should have. A single gate, held one costly night longer than the timeline everyone else remembers, forces Genghis Khan's army to divert resources and time toward alternate routes and softer targets, delaying the eventual fall of the Jin capital by years rather than months.
The empire that would eventually stretch from the Pacific to the gates of Europe still rises. History is not so fragile that one gate unmakes an empire. But it rises slower, costs more, and leaves northern China with breathing room it was never supposed to have. Room that ripples forward into decades of subtly different politics, migration, and conflict that no chronicler of the real timeline ever got the chance to record. Somewhere in a modern Marine Corps mountain warfare archive, an after-action report exists describing a training rotation interrupted by an unexplained geological event, an ammunition expenditure log that doesn't match any range on file, and 7 names on a memorial that nobody currently serving can fully account for. No one who reads that file will ever believe where they actually died, or which empire they briefly, invisibly slowed down. Some gates are remembered because they never fell at all. This one is remembered, if it's remembered anywhere, for simply refusing to fall on schedule. What last stand should we rewrite next? Should American Rangers hold a hill the record books insist was already lost before reinforcements ever arrived? Or should a company of paratroopers stand at a crossroads that history says had no time left to be saved? Drop your wildest scenario in the comments. Hit that hype button to help this video reach more people. Subscribe for the next battlefield. And I'll see you at the gate.